Alcohol causes seizures, so let's talk about it. First, I'll tell you how bad my hangovers are from drinking sometimes, and obviously due to the medicine that I'm taking. It is the worst hangover one can imagine. Pounding headache. I can't drink coffee the following morning to wake up. I have to take my meds, go back to sleep, and wait until usually 1 o'clock. That's when I wake up naturally, and then I can kind of begin to start living life again. Historically speaking, if I have too much caffeine in and of itself, that can cause a seizure. So, if I am experiencing a severe headache due to alcohol the evening before, and then I try to counteract that lack of sleep, the fatigue and tiredness from that lack of sleep, as well as the headache, now I'm introducing coffee, a stimulant, into that equation. There's too many forces involved, and I'm going to have a seizure. So, the reason I'm talking about this today is because I know that there's a lot of different conditions out there where some people might respond differently to alcohol. And hey, I'm from Iowa. I grew up boozing pretty hard. It's something that you do in the Midwest because there weren't as many concerts going on. We didn't have beaches nearby. So it was just, we did it more often than most people. Special shout out to University of Iowa. They were the number one party school by Princeton Review 1 year while I was in high school. Also, special shout out to University of Wisconsin. I'm sure I have some dignity laying around somewhere on their campus as well as University of Iowa. So anyway, let's get to it. Booze and seizures. First little thing I'll mention, little fun thing about myself. If I decide to drink, like have an actual fun evening where I'm going to drink more than 2 drinks, which we'll get back to, I have to plan 4 days into that whole thing. The night before I'm going to drink, I usually go for a good run, get a nice sweat, get my heart rate up, get a lot of nice breathing going so that I can get really good oxygen and blood flow moving throughout my brain. And you'll get to understand a little bit more of that as we go along here. A lot of times, if I'm too stagnant and I don't have good blood and oxygen flowing through my brain due to my malformation, that can contribute to a seizure. So before going into an evening of drinking, I gotta be nice and polished and ready. I gotta warm up for the big game. Pretty interesting. So I thought what I would do is we would take a look at what the professionals and science has to say about drinking and seizures. So I pulled up some honorable mentions from epilepsy.com, and it's pretty interesting and thought-provoking. Bullet number 1, in small amounts, alcohol does not cause seizures. A drink or two now and then does not increase seizure activity. As we've all probably been told at one point or another, 2 drinks is kind of that standard, that maximum, that if we have 2 drinks, we are pretty much in the safe zone. And I've certainly found that to be the case. So something that maybe you're not familiar with, that, hey, it's good to know. Bullet number 2, small amounts of alcohol don't change the amount of seizure medicines in your blood or change findings on EEG studies. And I'll tell you, that's very interesting to me because I've just always thought that, it can have an effect on your medicine levels. I guess I really never thought it through too much, but that's cool to hear that even though you're drinking, the amount in your blood is still there. I guess that's pretty common sense. Bullet number 3, when alcohol is related to seizures, it is often the state of alcohol withdrawal that causes the seizures, not the drinking itself. Your risk of seizures may be higher after having 3 or more beverages. Again, that's pretty hand in hand with the whole 2-drink maximum kind of thing. I'll return to the beginning of this bullet point. It says it is often the state of alcohol withdrawal that causes the seizures, and I'll get more into that in a second. My epileptologist, she mentioned that there was a patient of hers who, whenever they would drink, they would have a seizure. So, I'm sure this might be the case for some of you out there listening to this, where perhaps when you do drink, you have a seizure that is provoked rather immediately or soon after. I'm curious if there's people out there who have that. But anyway, bullet number 4, binge drinking and alcohol withdrawal can lead to status epilepticus, which can be potentially fatal. And I'm sure some of you are familiar with this term, which is when you have seizures just back to back with no recovery. And I guess when the definition is set in stone there, that's when you've had a seizure for 5 minutes, which, oh my gosh, I hope that never happens. That sounds awful. I think I've actually had that before, but it potentially fatal. Wow. Okay, so I'm a little scared now thinking about that. Seizure meds. This is bullet number 5 now. Seizure meds can lower your tolerance for alcohol, so the immediate effects of alcohol consumption are greater. In other words, people get drunk faster, rapid intoxication. Meds are similar to the acute effects of booze itself. No kidding. When I was taking trileptal in college, I would be 3 sheets to the wind by the time I got to my economics class. I fell asleep unknowingly during that class, and I guess the professor was like, "Hey guys, try not to wake him." And the 6th bullet point I think we're at now: withdrawal seizures may occur 6 to 72 hours later after the drinking has stopped. And that is, again, very in line with what I mentioned about having to plan 4 days around my drinking, because that's when the withdrawal happens. And I'll tell you specifically in my case, because my case is a huge malformation that encompasses the entire right side of my brain. So for me, that stress withdrawal. Now let's take a average Joe off the street who doesn't have epilepsy or any structural damage. They can drink whatever it is that their heart desires, and then they'll have that hangover, that pounding headache, sensitivity to noise and light, maybe take some ibuprofen and drink some coffee afterwards. Now, for someone with my condition, where I have just this really large intersection and network of misaligned and nested veins and arteries, the withdrawal is going to put a stress on that my brain just can't handle, and then that's where the seizure is going to begin. So the repercussions are pretty obvious to identify if I drank way too much within that 72-hour period. And I'm curious out there, for people who don't have a structural issue like I do, what that looks like for you guys. Do you have seizures that are alcohol related within a couple days after drinking, and what do those look like? So anyway, that about does it with all those bullet points right there. And a little fun thing I just wanted to throw in there is that even though we can't drink as much as we used to, I can't exactly do keg stands anymore. The good news is the medicine that I have to pay for, that price itself is offset by not having to drink as much, because, I don't have to buy a 30 rack of Coors or whatever just to get lit, whatever you want to call it. 2 drinks for me, and boom, we're off to the races. So those prices offset. And I want you guys to just know that I am no role model. If we got any, you know, younger crowds listening to this, okay? I'm just, like I said, I grew up in the Midwest. It was kind of a culture thing. I've just always enjoyed drinking. And it's just, I obviously have not kept that as a very large priority anymore. I just don't care to. The headache is just not worth it, and having to plan around it. 2 drinks every now and then, that's all I need. But hey, I still enjoy it. Hey, I mean, you gotta unwind every now and then. So I'm gonna start getting into some instances where I've had seizures due to booze, and just areas where booze was involved. So I'll tell you the first one where I know I had a seizure due to alcohol, and this was shortly after my first convulsion seizure, when my epilepsy had really turned up a notch or 10. I was at a day rager. This was in college, and we start drinking and partying and messing around at like somewhere between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. And man, I was going at it. I brought my own bottle of champagne, so I was drinking that, and there was also a joint in rotation that I was certainly partaking in. Seattle, Washington, rather, it's a place where marijuana is rather plentiful. And I finished that bottle of champagne, had made myself a couple of mixies afterwards, and went to bed. When I got home, damn near passed out. A lot of that evening I don't quite remember. And then, well, not evening, it was the entire day. Day rager, dager, whatever. I'm taking a fun stroll down memory lane. As you guys can tell, this was a lifestyle that I really enjoyed back in the day, and it's been brutally separated from me. And hey, the silver lining in epilepsy, I guess. I've always, had, I don't want to say addictive personality, but when I enjoy something, I enjoy it. But good news here is epilepsy has cut that behavior short, because even if you don't have epilepsy, excessive consumption is never a good thing. And I have started to live a better life because of a much more active lifestyle. I'm healthier. Sorry, that was my phone. And I was in a yoga class a couple days later, and 2 evenings later, I was in a yoga class, and that's when I had a convulsion seizure again. The left side of my body convulsed, and I mean, I didn't connect the dots at the time, but as you'll get to know from me sharing this with you guys, we'll find out that that 2-day time period is really 2 to 3 day time period is when you're susceptible for having a seizure due to the withdrawal. And this one certainly was no exception. However, I will say that it certainly didn't help that the weed was involved. And then in addition, sorry, I'm bouncing around a lot. A big reason why I would have these seizures in the evenings is because the stress of the day has accumulated. Your medicine levels are wearing off. So for example, I can't help but think if I was doing yoga now this yoga class wasn't too stressful, so I don't think it had anything to do with the exertion that was involved in that yoga class. It's just because in the evening the meds have worn off, and your levels are low, so your line of defense is less, as well as the stress of the day accumulating. So I can't help but think that, let's say I did that yoga class in the morning, that I wouldn't have had a seizure. So let's take a look here. On to my next topic, or just talking point. I'll tell you, after that, there was plenty of times where I had evenings of debaucherous drinking where I didn't have a seizure within the next couple days. And this was during my college years. And as you'll find out, my epilepsy, especially the ramifications of having such a large malformation, the consequences became much more dire as time went on. And I'll give an example. I went out to the bars with some of my friends and my new roommates in college, and we were not holding anything back, drinking plenty. And then after the bar closed, we went home to my new roommate's house, and we were playing beer pong with Guinness of all drinks to play beer pong with. And that was just some excessive consumption, and obviously that went pretty late into or early in the morning, and I woke up obviously pretty exhausted. Surprisingly, I wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, but that really, I think, has to do with the fact that it was only booze. I was only drinking booze. I went to bed and just waited until I naturally woke up. And so it wasn't as bad. And I will say that much like epilepsy is known to do, sometimes are just better than others, sometimes are worse than others. So several times I'll wake up after a night of drinking and I'll have a much worse headache than I have had in the past. So that's one that, interestingly enough, I drank a bunch and didn't have a seizure due to. So I'll tell you another time that booze was involved and I did have a seizure. So this was after college. I was back home in Iowa living in a rundown apartment. Rent was $600 amongst the three of us. So we were all paying $200 a month, and we got what we paid for. Crooked landlord, awful appliances, whatever. So it was one evening. We were obviously all drinking just as a normal weekend. And what I did was, at this time, because at this point I have realized that marijuana is definitely a trigger for seizures for me, especially because of the THC. CBD obviously isn't a problem, it's an anti-inflammatory. So what I was doing that evening is I was kind of thinking to myself, hey, well, I really want to enjoy some marijuana because everybody else was. I was like, you know what? Let's just do a little science experiment. I'm going to smoke some weed and we'll find out in 2 days from now if that causes a seizure. Sure enough, 2 days later, I was going for a run and I had a seizure on the sidewalk that I was running on. And here's what I'm going to say. When there's multiple forces at play, that's when you're going to have a seizure, because as you're probably noticing in this little timeline I'm giving you, I had a seizure when I was at that day rager party and I was drinking tons of alcohol and then smoking weed. So of course that's a recipe for disaster. And then this one, again, I was drinking. Here I was, a genius, thinking I'm going to do a little science experiment. Let's see if weed does anything. Well, what else? Guess what, Brandon? You were also drinking beer that evening. You were on the verge of being drunk while you took a hit of that marijuana. So what do you think is going to happen? So that's really the big thing here that I've been noticing over time, is that when there's multiple forces at play is what's going to do it. If you've not been exercising and then you decide to, maybe that's not as big of one. But if you're drinking and then you also decide to do some other irresponsible behavior with regards to your epilepsy, well, you're likely going to have a seizure. So then here's another one that happened directly because of booze. And this was some BS. I was out in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. I met up with a buddy of mine, got a six-pack, or, well, a six-rack, whatever, of PBR. I don't know what it was. I'm going to get some judgment for having got that drink. I had 3 beers that evening. Just 3. Okay, I know that's one more than the recommended amount, but 3, man. The following morning, 3 a.m., after that evening, I woke up at 3 a.m. due to a seizure. Now, I can't say with 100% confidence that it was due to the booze. You know, we can all have seizures at random times, but that was the only irresponsible behavior I had within those past couple of days. 3 drinks, man, and then I had a seizure the following, early in that morning afterwards. So that was some BS. next time, here's one where I didn't have a seizure. It was New Year's. I was close to, not being able to recall some of that evening. Certainly got a little generous, well past the recommended amount. There was shots going on that I tried my best to dodge a few of them, but then there was some that I kind of caved in and was like, I'll just do my usual protocol where I just sleep in really late and not drink coffee. And when after that, I mean, that's one where I really thought that I would have had a seizure, but I didn't. So that's really interesting. So if there's something to be taken away from this, I suppose it's I don't know. Be careful with when you're boozing. I'll tell you a couple things about myself that I've learned over time is that I'm open to experimenting. We experiment with our medication, and those all have potential side effects. We might have a seizure because we're not taking the right meds, we're not taking a high enough dose. But it's all a big experiment. We're all walking science experiments. So I take that to things such as drinking because, hey, I just enjoy drinking now and then. Sometimes I might be a little irresponsible with it, but I enjoy it. Obviously, I enjoy other things in life more than drinking, but it's a part of life that I am learning how to live with responsibly, and sometimes maybe a little irresponsible, but hey, I'm doing what I can to figure it out. I'm no role model. Do this all at your own risk. I'm not a doctor. I'm not advising you to do anything. I'm just telling you what I've been doing. And, enjoy life. This is all just something to think about. And I'll get into a couple other destructive behaviors in future episodes and how that might relate to our epilepsy and some of my experiences as well. So please reach out via other social media and platforms and share some of your thoughts. I'm curious to hear some of your experiences, what you've learned, and what you can share with everybody else. So I'm signing off. Thank you for listening if you've made it this far, and stay healthy.